He grabbed the man by the collar, slammed him against the wall, and said 6 words that made every person on that construction site go dead silent. Nobody touches what belongs to me. The problem, Alice Hayes didn't belong to anyone. She was a widow, a single mother, a woman selling soup out of a food truck just to keep the lights on. And Victor Raldi, one of the most feared men in Boston, had just made her his business. This is where everything changed for both of them. If this story already has your attention, hit subscribe, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Victor Raldi did not do surprises. Every morning of his adult life had been scheduled, controlled, and executed with the kind of precision that made lesser men nervous just watching him walk into a room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. When Victor Raldi spoke, people listened the first time because they had heard what happened to the ones who didn't. So when his driver Marco pulled up to the Hartwell construction site on a gray Tuesday morning in late October, Victor stepped out of the black SUV and said exactly 3 words. "Walk me through it." Marco fell into step beside him immediately. 2 other men followed, big, quiet, expressionless. The kind of men who looked at everything and reacted to nothing. The Hartwell site was supposed to be one of the cleanest operations in the family's portfolio. A 14-story mixed-use development in South Boston. On paper, it was a legitimate construction company. Clean contracts, real permits, a payroll that actually showed up on record. But Victor hadn't gotten to where he was by trusting paper. He moved through the site with his hands in the pockets of his overcoat, his eyes missing nothing. The way the workers moved, the ones who looked at him too long, the ones who made a point of not looking at all. He clocked everything. "Numbers are off," Victor said, not a question. Marco cleared his throat. "The project manager says materials cost ran over." "I didn't ask what the project manager says." Victor stopped walking. "I asked why the numbers are off." Silence. The kind that answered everything. Victor turned and looked at Marco with the flat, patient expression of a man who had made a decision and was simply waiting for the other person to catch up. "Find out," he said, "today." "Yes, sir." Victor resumed walking. The site was loud, hammering machinery workers calling to each other across the scaffolding, but none of it touched him. He moved through noise the way a knife moves through water. Nothing stuck. And then it hit him. Not a sound, not a visual, just a smell. Garlic, butter. Something slow-cooked and deeply real. The kind of thing that didn't come from a can or a restaurant kitchen trying too hard. It was the smell of someone's grandmother's house on a Sunday. It was the smell of something that had been made by a person who actually cared. Victor stopped. He hadn't meant to. His feet just stopped. He turned his head, and for the first time that morning, his expression shifted. It wasn't much, just the faintest crease between his brows, the slightest tilt of his chin. "What is that?" he said. Marco followed his gaze. "That's the food truck, sir. She's been coming here for about 3 months. The workers like her. We figured—" "I didn't ask for context." Victor was already walking toward it. The truck was parked just outside the chain-link fence that bordered the site. It was old, not charmingly vintage old, just old. The kind of vehicle that had been kept running through stubbornness and duct tape more than anything else. The side panel read Alice's Kitchen in hand-painted blue letters that were starting to fade at the edges. There was a line. 8 workers, maybe 10, waiting with the easy patience of men who knew whatever was in that truck was worth the wait. Victor walked to the window. He didn't wait in line. He never waited in line. He simply walked to the front, and the 2 workers who had been there first looked up, looked at his face, looked at the men behind him, and quietly stepped aside without a word. The woman at the window had her back to him. She was ladling something thick, dark, aromatic into a bowl, moving with the efficient rhythm of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She wore a navy apron and had dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, a few strands loose around her face. "Order," she said, still not turning. Victor blinked. Nobody talked to him that way. Nobody talked to him at all unless he initiated. He had entire rooms full of people who waited silently until he gave them permission to speak. And this woman with her back turned and her ladle in hand, had just said order to him like he was any other person in any other line. Something almost registered on his face. Almost. "What do you have?" he said. Now she turned, and he saw her, really saw her for the first time, dark eyes, direct and clear. a face that had known hard days and hadn't bothered to hide it. She wasn't young in the way that came from not having lived yet. She was young in the way that came from something still burning underneath. She looked at him the way you look at a stranger at your front door. Not afraid, just assessing. Beef stew, cornbread, and coffee, she said. That's it today. That's it. That's it. She didn't flinch. Take it or leave it. Victor stared at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, I'll take it. He ate standing up 10 feet from the truck while Marco watched him with the expression of a man witnessing something he didn't have a category for. The stew was extraordinary. Not because it was fancy, because it wasn't. It was just exactly what it was. Real stock, slow-cooked meat, vegetables that hadn't been overthought. The cornbread was dense and slightly sweet, the kind that crumbled at the edges when you broke it. Victor ate slowly, which was unusual. He usually ate the way he did everything efficiently and without sentiment. But he was tasting this. He was almost at the bottom of the bowl when he noticed the boy. He was sitting on an upturned crate just beside the rear of the truck, maybe 7 or 8 years old, small for his age. He had a book open across his knees and was reading with the focused intensity of a kid who had learned to make his own world because the one around him was unreliable. He hadn't looked up once since Victor had been standing there. Whose kid? Victor said, not particularly to anyone. Marco checked. Hers, the son. He comes with her every day. Victor said nothing. He looked at the boy for another moment, then looked back at the truck. Alice was moving again, filling orders, handing change back without counting it twice, keeping a conversation going with the workers at the window with the ease of someone who genuinely liked people. She laughed at something one of them said. It was an unguarded laugh. Real. Immediate. Victor finished the stew. He put the bowl down on the edge of Marco's car door. Marco barely stopped himself from objecting and straightened the front of his coat. Tomorrow, Victor said. Marco blinked. Sir. We're coming back tomorrow. He walked back to the SUV without another word. Marco stood there for exactly 3 seconds, then scrambled to follow because that was the job. The next morning, Victor was back. He told himself it was because he had more of the site to review. There were still irregularities in the accounts, still questions about the project manager, still follow-up that needed to happen in person. He told himself a lot of things. He walked to the truck. He waited this time in the back of the line, which was something Marco would think about for days afterward. And when he got to the window, Alice looked at him and said, Stew again, or you want to try the chicken today? Chicken, he said. Good choice. She turned to fill the plate. You're here every day, he said. He didn't know why he asked. He already knew the answer. 6 days a week, eh? She said, still working. Off Sundays. That's Leo's day. She nodded toward the boy who was in the same spot with a different book. Leo, Victor repeated. My son. She handed him the plate through the window. Their fingers didn't quite touch. You're the one who owns this site, aren't you? Victor paused. What makes you say that? She looked at him with those direct, clear eyes. Because the last time a man in a coat like that came through here, all the workers went quiet for an hour after. And you came back. She tilted her head slightly. People who just visit don't come back. Victor looked at her for a moment. Then he took the plate. The chicken, he said. Is it better than the stew? Different, she said. Not better or worse, just depends what you need that day. He almost said something. Instead, he nodded once and stepped away. But he stood in the same spot, and he ate slowly again. By the end of that first week, something had shifted that Victor couldn't name and wouldn't have admitted to under any circumstances. He found himself in a Thursday morning meeting with 2 of his lieutenants, serious men who had been with the family for 15 years, and he had thought about the food truck at least 4 times during the agenda. He hadn't heard a word of what was said in the last 10 minutes. He realized this. He did not appreciate it. Repeat that, he said to the man who had been speaking. The man repeated it. Victor processed it in 2 seconds, gave 3 instructions, and ended the meeting. But the thought came back. He didn't understand it. Victor Raldi's mind was not the kind that wandered. He had trained himself out of distraction the same way other people trained out of bad habits. Through will, through repetition, through the understanding that distraction was a vulnerability, and vulnerability got people killed. So why was he thinking about a woman in a food truck? He sat with this question for longer than he was comfortable with. Friday, he went back. This time the line was longer. One of the workers had brought a friend from another crew nearby. Apparently word had gotten out, and there were almost 15 people waiting. Alice was moving fast, her hands efficient, her voice carrying easily over the noise. She was handling it 3 things at once, talking and cooking and making change. And the boy Leo had even put his book down and was helping hand out napkins to people at the window, small and serious about it, like it was an important job. Victor watched this from the end of the line, and then he heard a voice behind him, loud in the way only uncomfortable people got loud. Hey, is this lady even supposed to be here? This is a private site, yeah. Victor turned his head slowly. A man he didn't recognize, thick mid-40s, wearing a contractor's vest, was standing at the edge of the gathering, talking to nobody in particular, but making sure everyone heard. I mean, she's taking up space blocking the entrance. She's not blocking anything, said one of the workers, a younger guy, defensive. She's been here for months. Don't care how long she's been here. This is private property. She's here every day taking money off these guys and what she got permission from, who exactly. The line had gone a little quieter. People were watching, and Alice had stopped moving. Not because she'd frozen, because she was standing very still and very straight at that window, and she was listening. Victor looked at her face. He saw something in it he recognized, not fear. Something harder than fear. The look of someone who had been told they didn't belong somewhere so many times they had built a wall around the flinch, but the flinch was still there underneath. He walked out of the line. He walked directly to the man in the contractor's vest. The man turned, started to say something, saw Victor's face from 2 feet away and stopped. She has permission, Victor said. His voice was completely level, completely quiet. The man opened his mouth. From me, Victor said. 3 seconds of silence. Right, the man said. That's fine. He left. He left quickly, and he did not look back. Victor turned back toward the line. Half the workers were looking at him. He returned to his position without a word. When he got to the window, Alice was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Not gratitude, or not just gratitude. Something more complicated than that. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, he said. A pause. Thank you, he nodded. What's today? She held his gaze for one more moment. Then she said, pork and beans, biscuits on the side. I'll take 2, he said. She blinked. You hungry, or you doing it for a reason? He glanced back at the line behind him. 1 for me, 1 for the boy, if he wants it. Alice looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached through the window and handed him a card, small white, the kind you got made at a drugstore. Alice's Kitchen, 617-555-0R182. If you're going to keep coming, she said, you might as well know the weekly menu in advance. I'll text it Sundays. Victor took the card. He looked at Ed, then he slid it into the inside pocket of his coat close to his chest. I'll be here Monday, he said. He walked to the crate where Leo was sitting and crouched down to the boy's eye level. He held out the second plate. Leo looked at it, looked at Victor. Thank you, he said quietly, but clearly already reaching for it. Victor stood back up and walked away. Marco was leaning against the SUV, watching everything with the expression of a man who had entered a parallel universe and was doing his best to navigate it. Not a word, Victor said as he reached the car. Wasn't going to say anything, sir, Marco said. Victor got in, closed the door. In the silence of the back seat, he reached into his inside pocket, just to make sure the card was still there. It was. He left it there. The following week, something happened that Victor had not anticipated and could not explain. He started arriving earlier. Not to inspect the site. The site inspection was the reason he gave Marco, and Marco wrote it in the schedule, and nobody questioned it, because nobody questioned Victor Raldi's schedule. But the truth that Victor barely acknowledged to himself was that he was arriving early enough to be first in line before the morning rush hit. It was the only time he had Alice's full attention without 12 workers pressing in behind him. She noticed. Of course she noticed. A woman who had survived on observation and instinct the way Alice had noticed everything. On Wednesday of that week, she looked up at him as she handed over his coffee and said, "You're early again." "I have a meeting at 8, he said. It was technically true. She smiled, not a full smile, just the corner of her mouth. "Your meetings must move a lot." He looked at her. "What does that mean?" "Monday you had a meeting at 7:30, yesterday at 8:15, today at 8. She raised an eyebrow, very slightly. Busy man. He said nothing. He took the coffee. She laughed softly and turned back to the griddle. Victor stood with his coffee and drank it and said very quietly to himself more than to her, "The biscuits are better when they're fresh." Alice glanced back at him over her shoulder. There was something in her eyes, warm, a little surprised, a little careful. "Then you should come early more often," she said. He didn't answer, but he came back Thursday and Friday, and both times he was the first one there. It was on a Friday, the third Friday, that he found out. He had been standing at the truck longer than usual, not because of the food, but because Leo had finally looked up from his book and started asking him questions. Careful questions, the way smart children ask things, as if they'd been thinking about it for a while and only just decided it was safe enough to say out loud. "Do you build things?" Leo asked. Victor looked at him. "Sometimes." "The workers say you own this place." "I do." Leo considered this. "Do you own other places?" "Several." "Like what?" Victor paused. He was not in the habit of explaining himself to anyone, let alone an 8-year-old. But the boy's eyes were serious and genuinely curious, and there was something in that, something about being asked a real question by someone who actually wanted the real answer that moved through him strangely. "Buildings," Victor said. "Properties. Different kinds of businesses." "My mom has a business," Leo said with a quiet pride. "I know. I eat at it every day." Leo almost smiled. Almost. "She says she's saving up for a real place. Like a bakery. She used to bake before." He stopped. Victor looked at him. "Before what?" Leo looked down at his book. "Before my dad died." The space between them went quiet. Not uncomfortable, just honest. "How long ago?" Victor said. He didn't know why he asked, but he asked. 2 years, Leo said, and 4 months. He said it precisely the way a child keeps time when time has broken something. Victor stood very still. He looked at this boy, this small, serious book-reading boy, and something moved through him that he had spent decades building walls against. He looked at Alice through the truck window. She was wiping down the counter with her back to them, and he could see the line of her shoulders, a particular kind of tension that wasn't stress from the morning rush. It was older than that. It lived in her. He had seen people carry burdens before. He had put burdens on people before. But this was different. He didn't have a word for different. He had never needed one. He crouched back down to Leo's eye level. "The bakery your mom wants," he said. "Does she talk about it often?" Leo thought about it. "She used to, not as much anymore." He looked up. "She says she has to be practical." Victor said nothing. He stood. He looked back at the truck. Alice had turned around. She was watching him and Leo with an expression she quickly rearranged when she saw him looking replaced with something more neutral, more managed. But he had seen it. For just one unguarded second, he had seen her face when she looked at her son talking to someone, and it was an expression of such careful, exhausted hope that it hit Victor like something physical. He walked back to the window. "I'll see you Monday," he said. Alice looked at him. Something in her expression asked a question she didn't say out loud. "Monday," he repeated, and his voice was different. Not soft exactly, but decided. He turned and walked back to the SUV. Marco fell into step with him. Said nothing. Victor got in. The door closed. For a long moment, he sat in the back seat looking forward at nothing. Then he said quietly, mostly to himself, "Find out everything about the Hartwell workers. Who they owe, who owes them, any debts tied to the site, personal, informal, family. Everything." Marco in the front seat wrote it down. And Marco. "Sir. Last name Hayes, widow, South Boston probably. Husband died 2 years ago." Victor paused. "Find out who he owed." He didn't explain why. He didn't need to. But in the pocket close to his chest, the small white card was still there. And for the first time in a very long time, Victor Raldi was thinking about someone else's problem more than his own. That was the moment everything changed. He just didn't know yet what was coming with it. Marco delivered the report on a Sunday. Victor read it at his kitchen table, not in his office, not behind his desk, but at the actual kitchen table where he sometimes sat when he needed to think without the weight of the room pressing down on him. He read it twice. Then he set it down, stood up, and walked to the window. He stood there for a long time without moving. The report wasn't long. It didn't need to be. The facts were what they were, and facts didn't require length. They required honesty. And Marco was nothing if not brutally honest when Victor asked for it. Patrick Hayes, age 34 at time of death. Carpenter by trade, worked the South Boston circuit for 11 years. Died 18 months ago, not 2 years, not 4 months exactly. 18 months and 9 days in what the official report called a workplace accident. Fell from scaffolding on a site in Dorchester. No foul play suspected. Victor had read enough official reports in his life to know what no foul play suspected meant when it came out of a Boston precinct report on a construction worker who died on a job site. It meant nobody looked too hard. He kept reading. Patrick Hayes had been a man who loved his family and made bad decisions to try to provide for them. That was how Victor read between the lines of what Marco had written. A man who borrowed money from a loan shark when the carpenter's union work dried up during a slow winter, who fell behind on the interest payments, who borrowed again to cover the first loan, who eventually owed money not to a loan shark on the street level, but through a chain of collection that had moved up 3 tiers to a fund that sat inside the Raldi family's financial structure. Victor put the report face down on the table. Patrick Hayes had died owing $7,000 to money that ultimately belonged to Victor's organization. And now Alice Hayes was showing up 6 days a week to a construction site that Victor owned, serving soup out of a truck. She could barely keep running, raising a son alone, and saving, if she was saving at all, toward a bakery she no longer talked about in front of Leo because the word had started to feel too much like pain. $7,000. Victor sat back down. He looked at the ceiling. $7,000 was less than he spent on a single dinner when he had to entertain business contacts. It was less than the detail work on the SUV outside. It was a number so small in the context of his world that it was almost insulting. And somewhere in the machinery of his own organization, someone was holding it over a widow's head. Marco, he said. Marco appeared in the doorway. He had been waiting as he always waited just outside the room. Patient and unobtrusive. Who holds the Hayes debt currently? Marco's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted. Tommy Rudo, sir. He picked up a portfolio of small debtors about 8 months ago. The Hayes account was in it. Victor looked at Marco. Has he contacted her? Marco took a half-second too long to answer. I believe there was an initial contact shortly after he acquired the portfolio, sir, to inform her of the transfer. And since then, I'm not certain, sir. Find out. Victor's voice hadn't risen. It never rose. But the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees, and Marco felt every one of them. Today. Yes, sir. And Marco, don't tell Tommy who's asking. Marco left without another word. Victor picked the report back up and read Patrick Hayes' section one more time. The man had been afraid, that was clear. Afraid enough to borrow from people he shouldn't have. Afraid enough that he hadn't told his wife how deep it went until if he'd told her at all. Alice had the look of a woman who had found out about her husband's debts the hard way. Not from him. After. Victor folded the report and put it in the inside pocket of his robe. He thought about Leo saying 2 years and 4 months with that small, precise grief. He thought about the line of Alice's shoulders when she didn't know anyone was watching. He thought about $7,000. He stood up, went to his office, opened his safe, and counted out $10,000 in cash. He put it in an envelope. He sealed it. He wrote nothing on the outside. He set it on the corner of his desk. Then he went and made himself a cup of coffee and thought about what he was doing and why, and the thinking didn't get him anywhere particularly useful, so he stopped thinking and drank the coffee instead. Monday came. He went to the site. Alice was already there when he arrived, steam arising from the service window, the smell of something with sage and onion threading through the cold morning air. Leo was in his spot with his book. Victor walked to the front of the line. By now the workers had come to understand this as simply the order of things, and Alice looked up and said, "You're late," in the same tone she used for everything, direct, a little dry, unbothered. Victor looked at her. "It's 6:45. I've been here since 5:30. She slid a coffee across the ledge. "You're late." Something almost crossed his face. What's today? A chicken and sage, roasted potatoes. She tilted her head. "You look tired." He picked up the coffee. "I don't look tired. You look like you were up all night reading something you didn't like." He looked at her for a moment, a real look, the kind that didn't belong in a transaction. "Is that what I look like?" "That's what you look like," she said without apology or decoration. He held the coffee in both hands. Do you always say what you're thinking? Only when it's true. She turned to plate his food. Do you want to tell me what you were reading? No. Then eat your breakfast. He took the plate. He stepped away from the window. He ate standing up in the spot he had made his own over the past 3 weeks. Same distance from the truck, facing the same direction. And he thought about the envelope in his safe at home and about how to solve a problem that was not technically his problem at all. Except it was, because his organization had made it one. And that meant it was his. He was halfway through the potatoes when Marco appeared at his elbow, quiet as always. Tommy's made 3 contact attempts with Mrs. Hayes, Marco said, keeping his voice low. Over the past 2 months, the last one was 11 days ago. Victor kept eating. What kind of contact? Phone, first 2 calls. Third one, Marco paused. Third one was in person, sir, at the truck. Victor set his fork down on the edge of the plate. He did not look at Marco. He looked at the truck. At Alice moving inside it, efficient and unhurried, talking to the next worker in line with that easy warmth she carried like a second skin. He came here, Victor said. Yes, sir. He came to this site. Yes, sir. The silence that followed was the specific kind that Marco had learned over 15 years to be very afraid of. Not because Victor was going to explode, because he wasn't. The quieter Victor got, the more certain the consequence. What did he say to her? Victor said. From what I could determine, he reminded her of the outstanding balance. He told her the interest had compounded. He told her, Marco stopped. Finish it. He told her that debts don't disappear when people die, sir. His words. Victor turned and looked at Marco with an expression that was entirely calm and entirely terrifying. He said that to her face. Yes, sir. At this site. Yes. Victor picked up his fork. He took one more bite of the potatoes. He chewed, swallowed, and set the plate down on the hood of Marco's car with the careful precision of a man exercising extraordinary control over himself. Set up a meeting with Tommy, he said. This week. Tell him it's about portfolio restructuring. Normal language. Yes, sir. And Marco. Sir, nobody at that window has any connection to my organization. Do you understand me? Nobody knows. Nobody talks to her. Nobody contacts her. Not until I say so. Understood. Victor straightened his coat. He glanced back at the truck just once, and then walked to the SUV. He did not look tired anymore. He looked like a man who had made a decision. Those were, in Victor's world, 2 very different things. The meeting with Tommy Rudo was set for Thursday at noon at a restaurant on Hanover Street that the family kept for exactly this kind of conversation. Good food, private booth, staff who understood the value of selective deafness. Tommy Rudo was 42, heavyset, with the easy confidence of a man who had been allowed to operate without close supervision for long enough to forget that supervision existed. He arrived 3 minutes late, which was either a mistake or a message, and the fact that he couldn't tell the difference between those 2 things was already a problem. He slid into the booth across from Victor and said, Vic, good to see you. What are we talking about today? Victor let the Vic pass. He would address it in a moment. I'm reviewing the small debtor portfolio you acquired in February, Victor said. He had a folder on the table. He opened it without urgency, specifically the Hayes account. Tommy's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did, a flicker of calculation of reassessment. The widow, yeah, that's a keen account. Small balance, some compounded interest. 7,000 base, Victor said. Right. With interest, it's sitting closer to 11 now. You went to the site, Victor said. Tommy stopped talking. The Hartwell site, Victor said. He didn't look up from the folder. My site. You went there and you spoke to Alice Hayes in front of workers, in front of her son, and you told her that debts don't disappear when people die. The booth went quiet. Tommy Rudo was not a stupid man, which meant he was now doing very rapid math about what this conversation actually was. Victor, I was just following up on a legitimate. You went to my site, Victor said, again finally looking up. His eyes met Tommy's and stayed there. Without telling me, without clearing it, you stood in front of my workers and threatened a woman. I didn't threaten anyone. I was collecting. You told a widow that her dead husband's debt was her problem. Victor's voice hadn't changed pitch at all. It was the same flat measured tone as always. That was what made it worse. In front of her 8-year-old son. Tommy's mouth closed. Is that accurate? Victor said. A pause. I may have been direct, yes. The account is closed, Tommy. The sentence landed in the space between them like something dropped from a height. Tommy stared. Closed. The Hayes debt, $11,000 with your compounded interest. Consider it paid. The account is closed. It's removed from your portfolio, and your access to the Hartwell worker list is revoked as of today. You can't just, Tommy stopped himself, started again more carefully. Victor, with respect, that's $11,000 of, I know what it is. Victor closed the folder. It's $11,000. I know exactly what $11,000 means to this organization and what it means to you personally, and I want you to understand that neither of those things is what I am thinking about right now. Tommy was doing the calculation again. Faster now. Is there something about this woman I should know, he said. His tone had shifted into something careful, something that was trying badly to be neutral. Victor looked at him. What you should know, he said, is that I am telling you something once, and it won't need to be repeated. He leaned forward very slightly, just enough to make the distance between them feel different. Alice Hayes is not to be contacted. Not by you, not by anyone in your network, not by anyone who has any connection to anything that touches this family's business. She is not to be approached, not to be observed, not to be known. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Tommy understood. The color had gone slightly from his face, which was all the understanding Victor needed. Yes, Tommy said. Good. Victor sat back. He picked up his coffee cup. Enjoy your lunch. He stood left $200 on the table for a bill that hadn't arrived yet and walked out. In the Hartwell, Marco was waiting. Done, Victor said. And the account, Marco asked. Cover it. Out of the discretionary fund. No record, no paperwork. Victor looked out the window. As of today, it never existed. Marco nodded. He started the car. They drove 2 blocks before Victor said, without inflection, what do we know about the permit process for commercial bakery space in Back Bay? Marco blinked. He kept his eyes on the road. I can find out, sir. Do that. Another block of silence. Sir, Marco said carefully, is there anything else you'd like me to look into regarding Mrs. Hayes? Victor said nothing for a moment. Then, find out what kind of ovens a bakery needs. The professional kind. I want to know what the setup costs. Marco wrote it down without comment. He had worked for Victor Raldi for 15 years. He had seen a lot. He had never seen this, but he wrote it down. Alice didn't know any of this. She had no idea that across the city in a booth on Hanover Street, a man had been quietly, efficiently warned away from her life. She had no idea that an $11,000 debt, a number she woke up thinking about at 3 a.m, sometimes in the dark quiet of her apartment, when Leo was asleep and the weight of everything pressed down hardest had been erased in the time it took to finish a cup of coffee. She was at the truck that Thursday, same as always. And when Victor came through the line, she handed him his plate and said, "You look different today." He took the plate. How so? She studied him. Not rudely, she just looked at people the way she cooked with full attention. Like you settled something, she said. He looked at her. Maybe I did. She raised an eyebrow. Good settled or bad settled? Does it matter? It always matters, she said. That's the difference between done and finished. He stood with his plate and thought about that for a moment. Good settled, he said finally. She nodded once, as if that answered something she hadn't said out loud. He stepped away from the window. He ate, and when he was done, he walked to the crate where Leo was sitting, and Leo looked up immediately this time, not back at the book, as if he'd been waiting. Did you finish it? Victor said, nodding at the book. Almost. Leo held it up so Victor could see the cover. Treasure Island. He just found the map. The best part is coming, Victor said. Leo's eyes went slightly wide. You read it a long time ago. Don't tell me what happens, Leo said immediately. I won't. Leo looked at him for a second with that careful evaluating look that was so much like his mother it was almost startling. Are you going to keep coming here, he said. Like every day? Victor looked at the boy. Every day, he said. And he meant it in a way that was no longer about the food at all. Leo nodded seriously like a small person receiving an important piece of information and filing it away properly. He went back to his book. Victor walked back to the SUV. He got in. He sat. Marco said nothing. Victor reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. He looked at Alice's number, the one from the small white card he had transferred into his phone that first week but never used. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put his phone away and said, "Take me back to the office." But the envelope in his safe was still there, $10,000 sealed and anonymous. He hadn't figured out how to give it to her in a way she would accept. He hadn't figured out how to give anything to a woman who didn't ask for anything and didn't flinch at anyone. He would figure it out. He had time. What he didn't know yet, what nobody knew yet, was that time was the one thing he was about to run out of. Because Tommy Rudo, sitting alone in that booth on Hanover Street after Victor left, wasn't thinking about $11,000. He was thinking about why Victor Raldi, a man who had never once in 15 years intervened in a small debtor case, had sat across from him for 20 minutes over a widow in a food truck. And Tommy Rudo, whatever his flaws was, not a stupid man. He pulled out his phone and made a call. He waited for the answer. And when it came, he said quietly, "I need you to find out everything you can about a woman named Alice Hayes. Whatever you can get. And be quick about it." He hung up. He ordered his lunch. He smiled at nothing in particular. And that smile, that small, private, dangerous smile, was the beginning of something that Victor had not seen coming. Tommy Rudo was patient when it served him. That was the thing people underestimated about him. They saw the bulk, the loud voice, the heavy hands, and they thought blunt instrument. They didn't see the part underneath the part that watched and waited and filed things away for exactly the right moment. It took him 4 days to get what he needed on Alice Hayes. Not because it was hard to find, because he was careful about how he found it and careful about who he used, making sure nothing traced back to him in a way that would reach Victor's ear before he was ready. He had a man, a quiet, forgettable man named Deeks, who worked in records and knew how to pull threads without making the fabric move, and Deeks delivered on a Wednesday morning. Tommy read the file over breakfast. He read it twice. Then he sat back and thought about Victor Raldi, about the meeting on Hanover Street, about the flat, controlled danger in Victor's voice when he said Alice Hayes is not to be contacted, and he thought about what that meant for a man in Tommy's position. It could mean two things. Either Victor was protecting a business interest that Tommy didn't have visibility into, or Victor Raldi, one of the most untouchable men in Boston, had developed a personal attachment to a food truck. Widow. Tommy thought about the way Victor had said her name, Alice Hayes, not the woman or the debtor, her name, with a precision that came from thinking it more than once. Tommy smiled again, the same smile from the restaurant booth. Personal attachment was leverage. And leverage was the only currency Tommy Rudo had ever really trusted. He didn't move on it immediately. He let another week go by. He watched through Deeks, through other quiet channels, and what he saw confirmed everything. Victor at the site, Victor at the truck, Victor crouching down to talk to the boy, Victor standing in his usual spot, eating slowly, watching Alice work with the expression of a man who didn't know he had an expression at all. Tommy made 2 phone calls on a Friday evening. Then he waited for the weekend to pass. Monday morning, Alice was at the truck at 5:30 as always. She had a new batch of beef stew on. She'd stayed up until midnight the night before getting the stock right, adding a handful of dried thyme she'd found at the back of the spice rack, testing it until Leo had padded out of his bedroom in his socks and said, "Mom, it smells amazing. Can I have some?" And she'd given him a small bowl, and he'd declared it the best one yet with the solemn authority of an 8-year-old food critic. She was thinking about that when the man appeared at the window. Not in the line, just there suddenly standing off to the side while the line was still forming, and something about his stillness made her look twice. He was not one of the regular workers. She knew every regular worker by now. Their orders, their preferences. Which ones took sugar in their coffee and which ones pretended they didn't. This man was new, mid-30s, lean, with the careful blankness of someone who had practiced having no expression. "Not open yet," Alice said. She kept her voice even. 10 minutes. "I'm not here for food," the man said. Alice kept moving, wiping the counter, checking the level in the coffee urn, but her hands slowed slightly. "Then what are you here for?" The man reached into his jacket and set a manila envelope on the ledge of the service window. He didn't say anything. He just left it there and stepped back. Alice looked at the envelope. She looked at the man. "What is that?" "Mr. Rudo sends his regards," the man said. "He thought you should know some things. About the man who's been eating at your truck." He paused. "Before you get in any deeper." Alice's hands stopped entirely. She looked at the envelope for a moment, Then she looked at the man with her clear, direct eyes and said, "Tell Mr. Rudo that I don't take deliveries from people I've never met before 6 in the morning." The man blinked. That was not the reaction he had been prepared for. "Mrs. Hayes," I said no. She reached out and slid the envelope back across the ledge toward him. "Take it with you and get out of my line. I've got workers coming in 10 minutes and I need the space." The man stood there for a moment, clearly recalculating. Then he picked up the envelope. He looked at her. "You should know what you're dealing with," he said, almost quiet enough to be genuine concern. "I appreciate that," Alice said. "Now move." He left. Alice stood at the counter for 30 seconds without moving. Then she finished wiping down the surface, checked the stew, and opened the window for service exactly on time. She told herself her hands were not shaking. They were not shaking. She had served food with a migraine with a twisted ankle on the day after Patrick's funeral when she'd had no idea how to get out of bed, but Leo needed to eat, and she had gotten up and cooked and served and held it together, and she could certainly hold it together now. But the name Rudo sat in her chest like a cold coin. She knew that name. She had heard it once in a phone call 18 months ago. A voice she didn't recognize telling her about a balance her husband had left behind, about interest, about how these things work. She had hung up. The calls had come back. She had stopped answering numbers she didn't know. And then 11 days ago, a heavy-set man with small eyes had come to the truck and said the words she had never forgotten: "Debts don't disappear when people die." She had not slept properly since, and now someone was sending her envelopes about Victor. She thought about Victor. She thought about the way he had stepped out of line that first day when the contractor started making noise, and the absolute quiet authority with which he had said she has permission, 2 words that had moved a grown man backwards without a single hand raised. She thought about him crouching down to Leo's level and asking about the book patient and unhurried like a man who had time for an 8-year-old, which was the last thing she would have expected from someone who looked like him. She thought about the way he said Monday, just that Monday, as if it were a commitment rather than a word. She didn't know who he was. Not precisely. She had guesses. She wasn't a naive woman. She had grown up in South Boston. She had been married to a man who made bad choices. She knew what certain kinds of men looked like and how they moved. She had known probably from the second week that Victor Raldi was not simply a real estate developer who happened to like her stew, but she had also watched him with her son, and that more than anything was the thing she kept returning to. A bad man didn't sit on his heels in the cold to talk about Treasure Island with a kid who had lost his father. A bad man didn't wait in line. A bad man didn't come back every single day just to stand 15 feet away and eat slowly as if he was in no hurry to be anywhere else. As if this parking lot, this food truck, this ordinary morning was actually where he wanted to be. She had met bad men. She'd been married adjacent to one without knowing it. She knew the texture of that. Victor was something else. She didn't have a word for it yet, but she was looking for one. The morning rush hit, and she worked it hard, and by the time the line cleared, she had pushed everything else to the edge of her mind, where she kept things that needed to wait. Leo arrived. She'd had him dropped at the site by her neighbor, Mrs. Corrigan, who did it for $10 in a container of stew twice a week, and he settled into his crate with a new book, this one thicker than the last. Victor came at 7:15. He looked at her when he reached the window, and she looked back at him, and something passed between them. Not a word, not a touch, just the particular quality of two people who have begun to read each other in the spaces between sentences. "What happened?" he said. "Just that." She blinked. "Nothing happened. What do you want today?" "Alice." She stopped. He had never used her name before. Always Mrs. Hayes or nothing at all. The sound of it in his voice was quieter than she expected. More careful. She looked at him. "Someone came this morning, before the rush." She kept her voice level. "Left an envelope. Said a man named Rudo sent it. Said I should know who I was dealing with." She held his gaze. "With you." Victor went very still. The kind of still that wasn't calm, that was the opposite of calm, organized into something that only looked calm from the outside. "Did you take it?" he said. "No, send it back." Something shifted in his face, quick and barely visible, but she saw it. "Why blasting?" "Because I don't take things from people I don't know," she said. "And because if someone is trying to tell me something about you, I'd rather hear it from you." The silence between them had weight. She kept her eyes on his and didn't look away. and he looked back at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, not the flat control, not the careful management. Something underneath that, something that was trying to decide whether to come up to the surface. There are things about me, he said carefully, that you probably already know, that you've guessed. Yes, she said, and you're still here. I'm still here every morning because I need to feed my son, she said. But yes, I'm still at this window talking to you, to a pause. So, he looked at her for a long moment. Then, Tommy Rudo is someone who works in my organization. He acquired a debt that your husband left behind. He was told 2 weeks ago that the debt was closed, that it no longer exists, that you are not to be contacted. Alice's breath stopped for exactly 1 second. Closed, she repeated. The account doesn't exist anymore. She stared at him. Something moved through her face, not relief, not yet, because she was too careful for immediate relief. More like the look of a person who has been bracing against a wall for so long, they've forgotten the wall might move. Wipe, she said, because it was a number that should never have gotten to you in the first place. His voice was flat, but it was a different kind of flat than usual. Something underneath it was working hard. Victor. She said his name deliberately the way he'd said hers. Why? He looked at her straight. Because it was the right thing to do, he said. And then after a beat lower, and because I wanted to. The morning noise went on around them. Workers passing machinery somewhere distant, the city doing what it did. And in the middle of all of it, this window, this space between two people, held something that neither of them had a clean name for. Alice looked down for a moment. Then she looked back up. Tommy Rudo is going to be a problem, she said. Isn't he? Victor's jaw set. I'm handling it. That's not an answer. It's the answer I have right now. He looked at her with something that was almost an apology, a man who was not practiced in apologizing, attempting the shape of it. I didn't think he would come here. That was a mistake on my part. Were you trying to protect me? She said. Not soft, not accusatory, just direct the way she was about everything. Yes, he said. She absorbed that. And the envelope. Whatever was in it about you, is it bad? Probably, he said without hesitation. She nodded slowly. Okay. He blinked. Okay. I didn't say I wasn't scared, she said. I said, okay, there's a difference. She reached for a cup, poured his coffee, slowed it across the ledge. I grew up in South Boston, Victor. I know what the world looks like. She paused, rare for her. I need to know that Leo is safe. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing. He's safe, Victor said, no hesitation. I swear to you, he is safe. She looked at him for a long time. The way she looked at things, she was trying to trust, not all at once, but carefully testing the weight before she put her foot down. Chicken today, she said finally. I put rosemary in it. Tell me what you think. He almost smiled. I will. She turned to place it, and then without turning back, she said, for what it's worth, the way you talk to him. To Leo, that's not something you fake. A pause. I watch people for a living. You can't fake that. Victor stood at the window and didn't say anything. He picked up his coffee when she slid the plate across. He looked at it, then he said very quietly, he reminds me of someone. She turned then, looked at him. Who? He met her eyes, and for just a moment, one unguarded, unmanaged moment, she saw something in his face that she hadn't expected. Something old. Something that had been locked away long enough to forget it was still there. Me, he said, at that age. Alice held that. She held it carefully the way you hold something that might break. Then she nodded once and turned back to the griddle, and neither of them said anything more about it. But it changed something. Quietly, permanently, the way things change when a truth comes out into the air after too long in the dark. Victor ate his lunch. Leo came over on his own without prompting and sat on the bumper of Marco's car, near where Victor was standing, and opened his book, and they were quiet together in the easy way that two people are quiet when they've decided they don't need to fill the space. After a while, Leo said without looking up, did Jim Hawkins make a mistake trusting the pirates? Victor thought about it. He didn't know they were pirates yet. But should he have known? Maybe, Victor said, but knowing and knowing are two different things. Sometimes you know something in your head before you know it in your gut, and the gut takes time. Leo considered this with great seriousness. Then, my mom says you have to trust people a little before you can trust them a lot. Victor looked at the boy. Your mom is right. She usually is, Leo said with the resigned accuracy of a child who had learned this through repeated experience. He went back to his book. Victor looked at the truck, at Alice's silhouette moving inside it. It was at that exact moment that his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Marco, he answered. What? Sir, Marco's voice was carefully controlled in the way that meant the news was not good. Tommy Rudo had a meeting this morning. Before yours, I just got confirmation. A pause, Mr. He met with two men from the Caruso family. The Caruso family, the one organization in Boston that had been circling the Raldi operation for 2 years, looking for a seam to push into, looking for weakness, looking for leverage. Victor's hand tightened on the phone. What was discussed? We don't have the full conversation, Marco said. But sir, one of the men asked specifically about a woman connected to you, by name. The ground didn't shift. Victor was too controlled for that, but something inside him went cold and sharp and focused in a way that had nothing to do with business anymore. How did they get her name? Victor said. Tommy, Marco said. Flat, simple, devastating. Victor turned away from Leo. He walked 10 steps further and kept his voice low and even. Where is Tommy right now? We are tracking him, sir. Good. Victor looked back at Leo on the bumper, at Alice's truck, at everything he had spent 3 weeks quietly building around himself without admitting that's what he was doing. Tell me the moment he moves. Yes, sir. And Marco, I need 2 men at this site, now, not visible, not in uniform, just present. Already on the way, sir. He hung up. He stood for a moment with his back to the truck, and the boy and he organized himself. Sorted the rage from the plan, put the rage in a box, kept the plan in his hands where he could use it. Then he turned around and walked back and picked up the last of his coffee and said nothing to Leo and nothing to Alice. He just stood in his spot. He finished his coffee, but the morning had changed. He could feel it, the particular vibration of something shifting underneath the surface of an ordinary Tuesday, the way the air changes before a storm, even when the sky still looks clear. Tommy Rudo had given Alice Hayes' name to the Caruso family. Victor had made one mistake. He'd allowed himself to feel something for a person inside the blast radius of his world. He had not hidden it well enough. And now the people who wanted to find his vulnerabilities had found one. He looked at Alice through the window. She was laughing at something a worker said. Unguarded. Real. Completely unaware that a man who had been humiliated in a restaurant booth had just handed her name to people who would use it without hesitation. This was his fault. He knew it. He would not say it out loud because saying it out loud didn't fix anything. But he knew it, and he would fix it, whatever it cost. The 2 men Marco sent arrived within 20 minutes. They folded themselves into the background of the site so smoothly that nobody noticed they were good at that. The kind of men Victor kept specifically because they were good at that. Alice didn't notice them either. She was finishing the lunch rush, counting change, talking to Leo about what he wanted for dinner. Victor walked to the window one last time. She looked up. Leaving early today, she said. Something to take care of, he said. She read his face. She was getting good at that, frighteningly fast. Everything okay? He looked at her. He wanted to say yes. He said, it will be. She held his gaze for a second. Then she reached across the ledge, all the way across, deliberate and unhurried, and put her hand briefly over his. 1 second, just one. Okay, she said, quiet, steady. Go take care of it. He looked at her hand on his, then at her face. Something in his chest did something he didn't have a word for and hadn't felt in so long it took him a moment to identify it. It was the feeling of having something worth protecting. Real and immediate and his. He had felt it once before a long time ago, and he had lost it. He had spent 20 years making sure he would never feel it again because losing it a second time would break something that wouldn't be put back together. He should have walked away from this truck 3 weeks ago. He had known it then. He knew it now. He did not walk away. He squeezed her hand, once brief, careful, barely anything, and then let go. He stepped back. I'll be here tomorrow, he said. I know, she said. He walked to the car. Marco pulled out immediately. Victor did not look back. But he thought about her hand on his for the entire drive, and he thought about Tommy Rudeau with a cold precision that was far more dangerous than anything that looked like anger. Tommy had made this personal. Tommy thought that was a power move. He was about to find out exactly how wrong he was. Victor found Tommy Rudeau at 9:15 that same evening, not at any of the usual places, not the restaurant on Hanover, not the card game in Charlestown, not the apartment in the North End that Tommy used when he didn't want to be found by his wife. Victor's men had tracked him to a bar in Somerville, the kind of place that didn't have a sign outside and didn't need one because the people who drank there already knew where it was. Victor went in alone. He had told Marco to wait outside, and Marco had not argued, which meant Marco understood the specific register of Victor's mood and had the good sense not to position himself between Victor and whatever was about to happen. Tommy was at the back, 2 drinks in, talking to a man Victor didn't recognize. He saw Victor the moment Victor came through the door. You didn't survive 15 years in this business without developing radar for the people you needed to fear. And whatever was in Tommy's face in that first half second told Victor everything he needed to know about how guilty the man was. Tommy said something fast and quiet to the man beside him. The man got up and left without looking at Victor. Smart. Victor pulled out the chair across from Tommy and sat down. He put his phone on the table face-up screen, dark. Victor, Tommy said. He'd had time to reassemble his face into something that was trying to look relaxed. It wasn't working. The Caruso family, Victor said, no preamble. Tommy opened his mouth. Don't, Victor said. Tommy closed it. I'm going to tell you what I know, Victor said, and then you're going to fill in the parts I don't. And the part where you think about lying to me, skip that. We're past it. Tommy's hands were on the table. He moved them to his lap, which was a tell. Victor noted it and said nothing. You met with 2 Caruso men this morning, Victor said, and you gave them Alice Hayes' name. The silence confirmed it before Tommy said a word. I wasn't trying to. Tommy stopped. Tried again. Victor, with respect, I think you've gotten too close to a situation that could compromise. You gave them her name, Victor said again. Same flat voice, same still face. Because someone needed to tell you, Tommy said. And now his voice had found something, not quite courage, but the thing that desperation looked like when it tried to wear courage's clothes. You pulled $11,000 out of my portfolio. You went to my site, my collection territory, and you shut me down over a widow in a food truck. That doesn't happen. That's never happened. And the Carusos have been watching us for 2 years, Victor, and if they find out that you have a weak point, so you handed it to them, Victor said. Tommy stared. I was trying to show you what it looks like from outside. You handed her name to my enemies, Victor said, to teach me a lesson. The way he said it, not loud, not sharp, just utterly, completely level, made Tommy stop talking entirely. Because there was no good answer to that sentence. There was no version of it that came out well for Tommy Rudeau. Victor looked at him for a long moment. How much did they pay you? Tommy's jaw tightened. That's not what, how much? A pause, a long one. 15,000, Tommy said, barely audible. Victor nodded slowly, as if this were simply information, as if he were filing it away in the same organized mental space where he kept everything else. Here's what's going to happen, Victor said. You're going to call your contact in the Caruso family tonight. You're going to tell them the information about Alice Hayes was incorrect. You're going to tell them she has no connection to me, that you were mistaken, that it was a different woman, that you're sorry for wasting their time. Tommy blinked. They won't believe that. Make them believe it. Victor, I can't just... Tommy. Victor leaned forward, just slightly, just enough. I'm not negotiating with you. I'm telling you what you're going to do tonight, and then you're going to call me when it's done, and I'm going to listen to that call, and I'm going to determine whether you've handled it adequately. He paused. Do you understand me? Tommy understood him. His face had gone the color of old concrete. And then what? He said. And then we'll see, Tommy, Victor said. He picked up his phone. He stood. He looked down at Tommy with an expression that contained no anger, no heat. Nothing that could be called an emotion, just a clean, clear assessment of a man deciding exactly how much of a problem something was and how to solve it. You did this because you thought I'd gotten soft, Victor said. You thought if you shook the table, I'd look up and remember who I was. Tommy said nothing. I remember exactly who I am, Victor said. That's what should worry you. He walked out. In the car, he sat in the back and said nothing for 2 full minutes. Marco drove and did not ask questions because Marco had survived this long by knowing when questions were appropriate and when they were not. Then Victor said, "The 2 men at the site tonight, I want them there tomorrow morning, early, before Alice arrives." "Yes, sir. And I need a clean number, not connected to anything, prepaid." Marco reached into the glove compartment without being asked and handed a phone back over the seat. Victor looked at it. He turned it on. He looked at the blank screen. He had told Alice it would be handled. He had meant it. But handled and resolved were not always the same thing, and there was a window, small, maybe 12 hours, maybe less, between Tommy making that call and the Caruso family deciding whether to believe it or pursue the thread regardless. 12 hours was not a lot of time. He dialed. Alice picked up on the third ring, and her voice was the voice of someone who had been awake, which told him she'd been waiting, which told him she was smarter than almost anyone he'd ever met. "It's Victor," he said, a beat. "I figured." Her voice was steady. "What happened?" "I need you to listen to me carefully," he said, "and I need you not to argue until I'm finished." A pause. "That's a concerning opening." "Alice." "Okay," she said, "I'm listening. Tomorrow morning I need you to take Leo to your neighbor, Mrs. Corrigan, and I need you to stay home. Don't come to the site. Don't open the truck." Silence. He could feel her processing. It could feel the particular quality of her thinking even through the phone, not panic, not immediate compliance, but the careful, deliberate weighing of a woman who did not make decisions without understanding them. "Tell me why," she said. "Someone shared your name with people who I am in conflict with," he said. "I'm handling it, but until it's handled, I don't want you at that site." Victor. "One day," he said. "I'm asking for one day." Another silence. Longer this time. He waited through it, which was not something Victor Raldi did comfortably, waiting, but he waited. "Are we in danger?" she said. "We," he caught it. He thought she might not have noticed she'd said it. "Not if you stay home tomorrow," he said. "And if I don't, Alice?" "I'm not arguing," she said. "I'm asking a real question. I need to know what we're dealing with." He exhaled quietly. "There are people who have figured out that he stopped, started again, that you matter to me, and they may try to use that." The silence that followed was different from the others, softer, heavier with something unnamed. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, you'll stay home." "Okay," she said. "One day." But Victor, her voice shifted, not afraid, something steadier than afraid. "I have a son. I have a life. I can't hide indefinitely. So whatever you're doing, handle it. Really handle it." "I will," he said. "I mean it." "I know you mean it," he said. "So do I." Another pause, and then quiet. "Be careful." He held the phone for a second. Nobody told Victor Raldi to be careful. It wasn't something that happened in his life. People told him what they needed, what they feared, what they wanted. Nobody thought about whether he was careful because it was assumed or required even that he was simply invincible. But she said it like she meant it, like she was talking to a person. "Good night, Alice," he said. "Good night," she said. He put the phone down. He looked out the window at the city, going by the lights, the late traffic, Boston doing what Boston did after 10 at night, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear, not doubt. Something adjacent to both of those but pointed in a different direction. Stakes, real ones, the kind that had nothing to do with money or power or territory, the kind that had a face. He made 3 more calls before midnight. The first 2 were tactical moving pieces securing information, making sure that Tommy's call to the Carusos was being monitored by someone Victor trusted more than Tommy. The third was to a man named Carver, who was old and quiet and had been connected to both the Raldi and Caruso families for decades in the capacity of what the business politely called a mediator, a man who could carry messages between hostile camps without getting shot. Victor told Carver exactly what he needed. Carver listened without interrupting and said he'd be in touch by morning. Victor did not sleep well. He slept in the way he always slept when something was unresolved, lightly surface level. One part of his brain always running inventory on the problem, while the rest of him went through the motions of rest. He was up at 4:30 and dressed by 5. At 6, Marco called. Tommy made the call, Marco said. 2:40 this morning. His contact in the Caruso family listened, said he understood. A pause. Sir, the contact's name is Sal Benedetti. Sal is not a man who simply understands things and lets them go. Victor had known Sal Benedetti for 12 years. Marco was right. What's he doing? We had someone outside his place last night. He made 4 calls between 3 and 5 a.m. Marco paused again. One of them was to a man named Declan Cross. Victor went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Declan Cross was a freelance contractor, not a word Victor used lightly. Contractor who the Caruso family kept on retainer for situations that needed to be handled outside the normal channels. Quietly, quickly, without attribution. He's not going after me, Victor said. It wasn't a question. No, sir, Marco said. The call was about the site, the truck. A beat. About Mrs. Hayes. Victor was already moving. He had his coat in one hand and his other phone, the real one, dialing the 2 men he'd left at the site. The first one picked up on one ring. Anyone approach the site, Victor said. Quiet all night, sir. No movement. Keep it that way. Nobody comes near that truck. Nobody. You call me the second anything changes. Yes, sir. He hung up. He called Alice's number, the prepaid phone, which she'd have recognized. It rang 4 times. 5. His jaw tightened with each ring. She picked up on the 6th. I'm up, she said, voice slightly rough with early morning. Leo's still asleep. Stay in your apartment, Victor said. Both of you, don't open the door for anyone you don't know. I need until noon. A pause. Victor, what's happening? I'm handling it. You keep saying that. Her voice was sharp now, fully awake. Tell me what's actually happening. He could hear Leo's voice in the background, a sleepy murmur, her name, her, answering him quietly, and something about that sound, that specific domestic ordinary sound, went through him like a wire pulled taut. There's a man, Victor said, who was hired to send a message. To me through you. He kept his voice even. Controlled. He's not going to get close enough. But I need you inside. A message, she repeated, meaning they had heard us to get to you. Yes. The honesty of it landed between them. He hadn't softened it. She hadn't asked him to. Okay, she said. We're inside. Leo's going to need breakfast. Cook something, he said. Stay away from the windows. Victor. What? When this is over, she said, you and I are going to have a real conversation. About all of it. About what this life of yours actually looks like from the outside. A pause. I need to know what I'm dealing with. If I'm going to... You, she stopped. If you're going to what? He said quietly. A long pause. Just handle it, she said. Please. He drove to the site himself. Marco tried to ride along. Victor told him to coordinate from the office. Keep eyes on Declan Cross's location, call him with any movement. Marco didn't argue. Victor arrived at the Hartwell site at 6:50. The truck wasn't there, wouldn't be there. Alice was home good, but the site itself was waking up workers arriving for the early shift, the whole ordinary machinery of a construction morning. His 2 men met him at the gate. Nothing yet, the taller one, Briggs said. He'll come during the breakfast window, Victor said. 7 to 8:30. That's when the truck is usually busy. That's when she'd normally be here. He looked at both men. He doesn't know she's not coming. Briggs nodded. So we wait. We wait, Victor said. They waited. At 7:20, a car Victor didn't recognize turned onto the block and slowed near the site entrance. It idled. Then it moved on. Then 4 minutes later, it came back. Victor's phone buzzed. Marco. That's Cross's car. Blue Civic partial plate 7 Delta. That's him, Victor said to Briggs. Don't move yet. The car parked half a block down. A man got out lean, unhurried, wearing a jacket that was slightly too heavy for the morning temperature. He walked toward the site with the particular casual deliberateness of someone trying to look like he was just passing by. Victor stepped out from where he'd been standing, not hiding exactly, just positioned, and walked directly toward the man. No hesitation, no angle, straight line. Declan Cross looked up and stopped walking. He saw Victor's face, recognized it. Everyone in this business knew Victor Raldi's face, and in the half second before he made his decision, Something happened in his expression that was almost fascinating to watch. The math of his situation playing out in real time. He'd been hired by the Carusos to send a message. The message involved a woman. The woman wasn't here. The man standing 20 feet in front of him was Victor Raldi, who had apparently been expecting him, and who had two very large men flanking him at a distance of about 15 feet on either side. Cross made his decision. He turned to walk back to his car. "Declan," Victor said. Cross stopped. His shoulders dropped slightly. The particular exhausted defeat of a man who knows the scene has already ended before it started. He turned back around. He looked at Victor. "I don't want any trouble," he said. "Good," Victor said. "Then we agree." He walked toward Cross at a measured pace, not rushing, not threatening, just closing distance. "You're going to call Sal Benedetti right now with me standing here, and you're going to tell him the job is off, that you looked at the situation and it's not something you can help with." Cross looked at him. "Sal's not going to like that. That's between you and Sal," Victor said. "I'm not Sal's problem right now. I'm yours." He stopped 3 feet away. "Make the call." Cross held his gaze for 5 seconds. Then he reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately, and pulled out his phone. He dialed. He waited. "Sal," he said when it connected. "It's Declan. I'm out on that job." A pause. "I looked at it. It's not a clean situation and I'm not in a position to—" He listened. His jaw tightened. "I understand, but I'm out." He hung up. He looked at Victor. "He's going to find someone else." "No," Victor said. "He's not." He held Cross's gaze. "Because in about 45 minutes, I'm having a conversation with Angelo Caruso directly. And after that conversation, Sal Benedetti is going to have a very bad morning for very different reasons." He paused. "Go home, Declan." Cross went home. Victor watched until the blue Civic was gone, then turned to Briggs and said, "Stay here until noon, then you're done." He walked back to his car. He sat in the driver's seat. He'd driven himself no Marco, which was unusual, and which was its own kind of statement about the morning. He sat with his hands on the wheel. Angelo Caruso was 71 years old and ran his family's operation with the careful, bureaucratic patience of a man who had survived long enough to understand that aggression was expensive. Victor had met him twice in formal settings and never in informal ones. What he was about to do, calling Angelo directly going over Sal Benedetti's head, making this a conversation at the top, was a significant move. It would cost him something. Concessions, probably. Territory, possibly. He had known this since the moment Marco told him Cross's name. He made the call. Angelo answered himself, which was either a good sign or a terrible one. "Angelo," Victor said. "It's Victor Raldi. I'm sorry to call early." "Victor," the old man's voice was careful, neutral. "I've been expecting your call." "Then you already know what it's about." "I know what Sal has been doing," Angelo said. "Without my authorization." A pause that was long enough to be meaningful. "I want you to know that." Victor absorbed this. "Is that so?" "Sal has ambitions that exceed his judgment," Angelo said. "This is a problem I was already aware of. Your call this morning has clarified the timeline for addressing it." This was the thing about Angelo Caruso. He was too old and too smart for small games. "I appreciate that," Victor said carefully. "The woman," Angelo said, "is she important to you?" Victor paused. The pause was its own answer, and Angelo was too experienced to miss it. "She's under my protection," Victor said. "That's sufficient," Angelo said. "She won't be touched. You have my word." Another pause. "In return, I'd ask that the harbor contract your organization holds, the renewal next spring, goes to competitive bid rather than direct assignment." There it was, the cost. Clean, reasonable, professionally delivered. "Done," Victor said. "Good," Angelo said. "Then we understand each other." "We do," Victor said. "Thank you, Angelo." "Take care of your woman, Victor," Angelo said. There was something in it almost warm, almost amused, the voice of a very old man who had seen everything and found human beings persistently interesting. "These things are worth the trouble. I learned that too late." He hung up. Victor sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. Then he called Alice. She picked up immediately. "Is it over?" "It's over," he said. The sound she made, not quite a sigh, not quite a laugh, just a release of breath that had been held since sometime yesterday, was the most honest thing he had ever heard. "Leo's making a mess of the kitchen," she said. "He decided to cook eggs and got very optimistic about it." Despite everything, despite the morning the calls cross. Sal Angelo, the harbor contract, all of it. Something that was almost a smile crossed Victor's face. How bad? There's egg on the ceiling, she said. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Alice. I have something I need to talk to you about. In person. He paused. Something I want to show you. A pause. Okay, she said slowly. When? Tomorrow mornings, he said. Not at the site, I'll pick you up. He hesitated, genuine hesitation, which was rare enough that he noticed it. Bring Leo. She was quiet for a moment. Then where are we going? Back Bay, he said. There's something I've been working on. The silence on her end was the careful kind, the kind that was thinking hard. Victor, what did you do? Come tomorrow, he said, and I'll show you. He heard her exhale. Something in it that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite hope, but lived exactly in the space between them, which was the space he had come to understand where everything real happened. Okay, she said, tomorrow. He drove back through the city and thought about an envelope in a safe in a bakery in Back Bay, and a small boy who had egg on his ceiling now. And he thought about Angelo Caruso saying, take care of your woman with that old, tired, knowing warmth. These things are worth the trouble, and he thought about the cost of this morning and every morning before it, and he decided with the same flat certainty he applied to everything in his life that it was worth it. All of it. Every bit. He had one more thing to do before tomorrow. He called the number of the property agent in Back Bay, a man he'd had on retainer for 6 weeks, a man who had been quietly managing a particular lease on a particular ground floor commercial space with excellent light and a functioning kitchen. It's Raldi, he said when the man answered. The Back Bay unit. I need it ready tomorrow morning. Full walkthrough. Have the paperwork on the table. Of course, Mr. Raldi, it'll be ready. Good. He paused. Make sure the kitchen is clean. She's going to look at the ovens first. He hung up. He drove. And somewhere across the city in an apartment where the kitchen now smelled like burnt butter and determination, a woman was cleaning egg off her ceiling and thinking about a man who had walked into her morning 6 weeks ago and had not, despite everything, walked back out. She was thinking about tomorrow. So was he. Alice was up at 5 the next morning. Not because of Leo, who was still deeply asleep with one arm hanging off the bed in the specific boneless way that only children manage. Not because of the truck, which was sitting dark and cold in its usual spot outside the site for the first time in 3 months. She was up because she hadn't really slept, and she had stopped pretending to try somewhere around 4 a.m. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table with both hands around the mug, and she thought the way she did her best thinking, carefully, honestly, without sentiment getting ahead of the facts. The facts were these. A man named Victor Raldi had walked up to her truck 6 weeks ago and ordered stew. He had come back every day since. He had quietly, efficiently, and without asking permission, removed a debt from her life that had been sitting on her chest like a stone since Patrick died. He had stepped between her and a threat she hadn't even fully understood, had spent 12 hours managing a situation that could have gone catastrophically wrong, and had done all of it, without once making her feel like she owed him anything. And now he wanted to show her something in Back Bay. She knew what it was going to be. She was not a woman who was easily surprised, and Leo had said it plainly enough. She's saving up for a bakery she used to bake before, and Victor Raldi was not a man who did small gestures. Whatever was waiting for her in Back Bay was not going to be a pamphlet about commercial real estate. The question was not what it was. The question was what she was going to do about it. She thought about Patrick. She thought about the last year of their marriage, the silences that had gotten too heavy, the phone calls Patrick took in the other room, the way he'd looked at her sometimes with an expression she'd read as tired, but now understood was afraid. He had been in over his head, and he hadn't told her, and it had cost him his life and left her with a debt and a son and a food truck and more strength than she had ever asked to develop. She thought about Victor's face when he'd said me when Leo had asked who he reminded him of at that age. She thought about the way he'd said it. Not performance, not strategy, just truth coming up to the surface in an unguarded second from a man who kept everything managed and controlled and locked down, and the word had just come out. Me. She thought about his hand, about the 1 second when she had put her hand over his at the truck window and felt something shift in him. Not dramatically, not like in the movies, just a very slight release of tension, like a man who had been holding a breath for a very long time and had briefly cautiously let some of it go. She finished her coffee. She went to wake Leo up. He was grumpy for 30 seconds, his standard morning position, and then she told him they were going somewhere with Victor, and he sat straight up and said where with the immediate alertness of a child whose interest had been fully engaged. I don't know exactly, she said. He wants to show us something. Leo considered this. Is it good? I think so, she said. Get dressed. Victor arrived at 8:15. She heard the car before she saw it, heard it idle at the curb, and she looked out the window and saw him getting out of the passenger side, Marco behind the wheel. Victor was wearing a coat she hadn't seen before, darker than usual, and he looked up at the building with the focused expression of a man who was doing something that mattered to him and was not comfortable with how much it mattered. She took a breath. Leo, let's go. She opened the building door before he could knock. He looked at her, really looked the full attention he always gave, and said, Good morning. Morning, she said. And then, because she had always been more honest than was strictly practical, I didn't sleep. Neither did I, he said. Leo appeared under her arm, already in his jacket book, tucked under one arm out of pure habit. He looked up at Victor. Where are we going? You'll see, Victor said. Leo accepted this with the reasonable patience of a child who trusted the person that's saying it, which was information that went through Alice's chest like a key in a lock. They got in the car. Marco drove. Leo sat between Alice and Victor in the back seat and narrated various things he saw through the window with the running commentary of a child who assumed everyone found the world as interesting as he did. And Victor answered his questions about buildings, about why certain streets were one way, about what Back Bay meant as a name, with the same focused attention he gave everything. Patient, specific, like the questions were worth answering properly. Alice watched Victor answer her son's questions and said nothing and felt everything. The car stopped on a quiet block. Victor got out. He opened Alice's door. She was already opening it herself, but she let him, and he crouched down to Leo's level as the boy climbed out and said, Ready. For what? Leo said. Come see, Victor said. He led them to a ground floor space. The door was glass, and the property agent was already inside. She could see him through it, middle-aged, slightly nervous in the way people got around Victor. Victor held the door open and she walked in. And she stopped walking. It was a beautiful space. She wasn't thinking about beautiful spaces. She was a practical woman. She thought about square footage and ventilation and whether the plumbing could handle a commercial dishwasher, but it stopped her anyway because it was exactly right. Not too large, not too small. The kitchen was through an open doorway, and she could already see the equipment, professional range 2-deck ovens, prep tables, a hood system that was actually properly sized, and the front area had light. Real light, the kind that in a few years she could imagine people sitting in with their coffee while they waited on a Saturday morning, and she was just beginning to understand what was happening to her. Victor, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Look at it first, he said. Don't say anything yet. Just look. She looked at the kitchen. She walked into it. The agent stepped back. Clearly understanding his role was to be invisible, and she opened the oven doors and looked at the racks and ran her hand along the prep table surface and checked the range burners in the hood pull. All the things a person who had baked professionally checked before anything else. Leo trailed behind her, touching things with restrained curiosity, watching her face to understand what he was supposed to think. She came back out. Victor was standing in the front area with his hands in his pockets, watching her with that careful, controlled expression. But underneath it, she could read him. Now, she had been reading him for weeks. He was nervous. Victor Raldi, who had stood in front of Tommy Rudo and Declan Cross and Angelo Caruso without changing his breathing, was nervous about what she was about to say. That more than anything was what undid her. The lease, she said. Is it in your name? It can be in yours, he said. It should be in yours. The setup is already paid for. Consider it a gift. No strings, no obligation. It belongs to you regardless of... He stopped, started again. Regardless of anything else. Regardless of what I decide, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at him. What are you hoping I decide? He was quiet for a moment. The agent had somehow found a reason to be in the very back of the kitchen. Leo was examining something near the window with studious attention, clearly understanding that this was a grown-up conversation happening and giving it space with the particular sensitivity of a child who had learned to read rooms young. I'm hoping, Victor said, that you'll let me be part of this. Part of... He made a slight gesture that encompassed the space, but she understood it was larger than the space. This, whatever this becomes. Part of my life, she said directly. Yes, he said. Same flat voice, but his eyes were doing something different than usual. Something that wasn't managed at all. I know what I am. I know what my life looks like. I'm not going to pretend it's simple or clean because you'd see through it in 30 seconds, and we'd both know I was lying, and I don't want to lie to you. He paused. But I also know that whatever I've been doing for the last 6 weeks, coming to that truck every morning, standing there, he stopped. It wasn't about the food. It hasn't been about the food for a long time. Alice looked at him for a long time, the kind of look that went all the way to the bottom of something. I know it hasn't, she said. I know you know, he said. I know you know I know, she said. The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. She had come to understand that was the closest thing he had to a full smile, and she had quietly decided it was worth more than most people's full smiles. Mom, Leo said from the window very carefully, not looking at them. Yeah, bud. The ovens are really big. They are, she agreed. Can you make croissants in them? You can make anything in them, she said. Can you make the ones with the chocolate croissants, she said. Yes. Leo nodded, still facing the window. Okay, he said with the tone of someone who has evaluated a situation and found it acceptable. I think we should take it. Victor looked at Leo, then at Alice. And Alice looked back at him with the same direct, clear, undeflected gaze she had given him from the very first morning at the window. The gaze that had never been afraid of him, never tried to manage him, never asked him to be something he wasn't, and never pretended he was something he wasn't either. There are things about your life that scare me, she said. I want to be honest about that. You should be scared, he said. It would be a mistake not to be. And I need Leo to be safe. That's not a condition, it's the whole thing. It's everything. I know, he said. He will be, I promise you that. She took a breath. I don't need you to fix things for me, she said. I need you to understand that. I'm not someone who needs to be rescued. I've been doing this alone for 2 years, and I can keep doing it. I know that, he said. I've watched you do it every morning. That's not why he paused. That's not what this is. Then what is it, she said, not combative, genuinely asking. He looked at her with that unguarded thing she'd first seen when he said me about Leo, that old honest thing that had been locked away for a long time. I spent 20 years building a world where nothing could touch me, he said quietly, where I didn't need anything from anyone, and nothing could be used against me because there was nothing to use. He paused. And then I walked up to a food truck because something smelled real. And everything I'd spent 20 years building, he stopped, looked at her straight. You're the first thing in a very long time that felt like mine. Not something I own, not something I control, just mine, in the way that actually matters. The space between them was very quiet. Leo had stopped pretending to look out the window and was now openly watching both of them with the frank evaluation of a child who had decided subtlety was taking too long. Alice looked at Victor, at this man who had walked into her morning like an interruption and had turned out to be something else entirely. Something she didn't have a clean category for, something that sat outside the organized boxes of her practical, deliberate life and refused to be filed away. She thought about every morning for 6 weeks. She thought about the way he ate slowly. She thought about Treasure Island and cornbread and the specific quality of his presence, solid, unmoving like a wall that had chosen to stand between her and the wind. She thought about Patrick and what she had learned and what she deserved. And for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel guilty about the second part. Okay, she said. Victor looked at her. Okay, what? Okay to all of it, she said. The space, and she held his gaze. The rest. He was quiet for exactly 1 second, then you're sure. Victor. She looked at him with that slight dry lift at the corner of her mouth that he had come to watch for every morning. I said what I said. Something passed through his face, swift and real and unmanaged, the kind of thing that had been waiting behind the flat, controlled surface for weeks, maybe years. And it was not soft exactly. It was too honest for soft, but it was open. Genuinely, completely open, in the way that a man opened when he had finally stopped spending energy on keeping himself closed. Leo slid off the windowsill and walked over and stood beside his mother and looked up at Victor. "Does this mean you're going to be around more?" he said. Victor looked at the boy. "Yeah," he said. Leo thought about this. "Will you still come to the truck? Even when she has this place?" "Every day," Victor said. The same words he had said before to that same question, but they meant something larger now, and all three of them felt it. Leo nodded once, the decisive nod of someone who has made a final determination. Then he reached out and took Victor's hand, just took it completely matter-of-factly, the way children did things that adults spent months working up to, and turned toward the kitchen door. "I want to see the ovens again," Leo said. Victor looked down at the boy's hand in his. Something moved through his face that he didn't try to manage. He didn't have words for it. He didn't need them. He walked with Leo toward the kitchen. Alice followed, and she watched this man, this careful, controlled, complicated, dangerous, inexplicably gentle man, crouch down beside her son and point at the oven thermostats and answer questions about how high a temperature croissants needed with total seriousness, as if this were the most important conversation of the morning. She stood in the doorway between the front of the space and the kitchen, and she looked at what her life was becoming, and she felt something she hadn't felt in so long, she almost didn't recognize it. Not happiness exactly. Not yet. Something earlier than happiness. The ground before it. Possibility. Real specific morning light on the prep table possibility. She looked at the ovens and thought about the bread she would make. She thought about the smell of it, the particular deep yeasty warmth of a real bakery, the kind that came through the door and hit you on the street outside, the kind her own grandmother's kitchen had smelled like on Saturday mornings when she was Leo's age. She thought about the signs she would have painted, not hand-painted this time, not blue letters starting to fade. Something that would last. She thought about all of it, and she felt it like a door opening. The property agent materialized from the back of the kitchen with the paperwork and a pen, and Alice signed her name at the bottom of the lease with her own hand, not Victor's, hers, because it was her name above the door that she wanted. And when she finished, she looked up, and Victor was watching her with an expression that she had never seen before and that she understood was rare, not possessive, not satisfied in the way of a man who has gotten what he wanted. More like reverent, the look of someone standing in the presence of something they know matters. "It's yours," he said quietly. "It's mine," she agreed. They left the property agent to his paperwork. Outside, the morning had turned warmer than it had any right to be. In late October, one of those stolen Boston days, where the light came in low and golden and made everything look slightly better than it was, which was its own kind of grace. Leo ran ahead on the sidewalk, arms out, then looked back and said, "Are we getting breakfast somewhere good?" "Not the truck, somewhere new." "Wherever you want," Victor said. Leo pointed at a diner across the street with the unerring instinct of an 8-year-old who could locate food at 100 yards. "There." They crossed. Victor held the door. Alice walked through. Leo was already pressing his nose to the glass of the pastry case inside. They sat at a booth, Leo on one side, Victor and Alice on the other, and the waitress came and took their orders and brought coffee without being asked the way good diners did. And Leo ordered pancakes with the focused seriousness of a person making an important decision, and Victor ordered eggs because it was the kind of morning that called for something simple. And Alice ordered nothing but the coffee because she was still too full of everything else to be hungry, and it was all entirely ordinary. And it was the most ordinary thing that had ever felt extraordinary. Victor put his coffee down. He looked at Alice. She looked back at him. Between them, Leo was explaining to himself the structural logic of stacked pancakes quietly and with great conviction. "For what it's worth," Victor said, low just for her, "I haven't been to a diner like this in probably 15 years. She looked at him. "How is it?" He looked around at the booth, at the coffee, at Leo, at her. He came back to her face. "Better than anything I've had in 15 years, he said. She held his gaze. Then she reached out across the table, the same deliberate way she had at the truck window, unhurried, certain, and put her hand over his. This time she didn't take it back. He turned his hand over, and he held hers. Leo looked up from his pancake engineering and saw this and said nothing, but he smiled a small, private, very satisfied smile and went back to his architecture. Outside, Boston moved the way cities move, loud and indifferent and eternal. Inside the booth, 3 people sat in the specific warmth of a morning that had cost something real to arrive at and was worth every bit of it. Victor Araldi had walked onto a construction site to inspect a money laundering operation, and had smelled something real. He had followed it, which was not something Victor Araldi did. He made decisions he did not follow. Things he did not detour. He did not stand 15 feet from a food truck eating slowly because he didn't want the moment to end. He had done all of those things anyway, and it had led him here to a diner booth, to a woman's hand in his, to a boy calculating the structural integrity of pancakes, to a signed lease in Back Bay with her name on it. He had spent 20 years making sure nothing could touch him. It had turned out the thing that finally did was a bowl of beef stew and a woman who looked at him like he was a person. He would take that. He would take it every single morning. Alice Hayes had survived the hardest years of her life through stubbornness and love and the refusal to stop showing up. And she had come out the other side into something she had not expected and would not have predicted and could not have planned for a man who made no sense for her life and fit into it anyway. The way certain things do when you stop trying to make them fit and simply let them land where they land. She had looked at Victor Araldi from across a service window, and she had seen underneath the coat, underneath the controlled voice, underneath the whole constructed architecture of a man who needed no one. Something she recognized. Someone who had learned to be alone and was quietly, stubbornly tired of it. She knew that feeling. She had lived it. And so she had handed him a coffee and told him to come back Monday. And he had come back, and then the Monday after that, and the one after that, and somewhere in the accumulation of all those ordinary mornings, something real had been built between them. Not quickly, not easily, but solidly. The way things built slowly were always solid. She was not afraid of what came next. She had been afraid before of debts and threats and the dark machinery of a world she'd only glimpsed at the edges, and she had stood straight in the face of all of it, and she would stand straight again whenever she had to. But today, this morning, she was not afraid. She was at a table with her son and a man who had held her hand across a diner table and meant it, and the coffee was hot and outside the window. Back Bay was going about its morning, and somewhere across the city, a lease with her name on it was waiting for her to fill it with bread and light and the smell of something real. Some stories don't announce themselves. They start with a smell, a bowl of stew, a woman who doesn't move out of the way, and a man who doesn't leave the line. They build in the spaces between sentences in the daily return, in the slowly earned trust of two careful people who have both been hurt enough to know what it costs and who decide eyes open that it is worth it anyway. This was that story, and it was just beginning.